Hello and welcome everyone to the Plastic Recycling Podcast. We have a special guest today, Martha from Wiley. Martha, I'll actually leave it to you to introduce yourself rather
All right.
than probably butchering the introduction.
Happy to do so. And hello to you and to our audience. It's really a pleasure to be here. We've been planning this for a while. I have been practicing environmental law for about 30 years. I'm at Wiley LLP in Washington, D.C. And a large part of my practice is helping companies promote plastic recycling. I've been general counsel to the APR for several years. What we're here to talk about today and the focus of my work is on obtaining letters of no objection from the Food and Drug Administration for recycled plastics. I think that
That's
covers
definitely
it for
been
today.
absolutely, and we'll definitely dig much more during the next 30 minutes. But that's definitely a huge topic, right? The FDA, LNO. Tell us a little bit more about what is an LNO, why is it important for recycled plastics, in food packaging in particular?
hmm Well, there's lots of uses of recycled plastics, but I think the premier use that's seen by the market certainly, and also by environmentalists, is for food packaging to go back into uh, food packaging. The important distinction I want to make right from the get-go is a letter of no objection, or it's also called a non-objection letter, but it's the same thing, is not an FDA approval for the resin. Okay, FDA doesn't approve things. They issue letters of no objection that they do not object. Okay, and that's a little bit different. So, just in terms of our terminology, I just want to set that stage. But in lieu of the approval, this LNO process, it's very important for the industry because FDA does review a secondary, also tertiary recycling processes, and for the collection, the cleaning, and the processing of post-consumer materials. And they issue this letter to confirm that the process meets the standards for food safe plastics. Okay. So they also review post industrial plastics, but they don't call those letters that they issue after reviewing those post industrial processes LNOs. They're called pre notice communication letters. But again, I just want to mention that for post industrial, you can get FDA to review your process, but the LNO process is reserved for recycled plastics.
In summary, it's essentially food packaging to go back into food packaging, and the FDA is looking at certain parts of the process and giving a no objection letter to say, yes, recycler of plastic, your material can be used. We have no objection, and your material can be used in food packaging so that we have more of a circular economy.
That's right. And with regard to the feedstocks, FDA states time and time again that they expect the feedstock to be, food packaging or qualify for the requirements for virgin resins for food packaging. And I mention this because there's many companies out there that are interested in recycling other types of feedstocks and putting those into food packaging, right? But some types of feedstocks may still meet FDA standards, such as feedstocks that need to be used in connection with medical devices or other FDA approved products, for example, feedstocks that maybe are collected directly from the end user rather than going through the post-consumer disposal and collection process. But all of those types of feedstocks, while there may be paths forward for them, agricultural plastics, for example, it's more difficult to establish the food safe plastic status for those materials. So the easiest path forward is food contact materials being recycled into food contact again.
Got it. But have you seen, so the easiest type of LNO to get is virgin food contact material being recycled and going back into food contact. But have you seen non-virgin food material obtaining LNOs that can then go into food packaging? Is that a realm of possibility?
Yes, and there are some. Probably the most standout example, quickest one that comes to mind, is coat
Mhm.
hangers. That's kind of an unusual one, but these letters of no objection are always conditioned on the submitter's representations about the
Mhm.
material. Okay,
Mhm.
but the idea there is the material that's used to make those kinds of coat hangers. They don't have a lot of additives in them. If there are any additives, that they are safe for use in food contact. And again, they don't go through the post consumer process. So that's one example, but there are others on FDA's website, which we should tell people
Mhm.
about right now, I guess. FDA has a list of all of the LNOs it issues on a website from the time the program historically started back in
Mhm.
the early 80s, 90s, I think.
Yeah, that's a long time ago. Tell us a little bit more about the historical context then of
Yeah,
LNOs and why is this important? How long has it been around for? And obviously now it's really started to become more and more necessary and popular as we kind of barrel down different legislations in different states.
right. So the LNO process was established in cooperation, really, with industry to promote the use of recycled plastics in food packaging and
Mm.
to understand what the standards would need to be to do that. And so historically, the PET industry got together with FDA initially to develop the program. The guidance that came out of that effort, it's been updated lightly in the past several years, but it's still excellent guidance. And over time, we've learned that it applies to additional materials as well. But the bulk of the LNOs that you'll see on that website of FDA's are PET, close to 200 of them. And then the next material that came along, of course, is HDPE, the milk jugs and juice bottles and the like. And that's a highly recycled material relative to other types. There's also some polystyrene and low density clearances as well. But the third material, which is really becoming very popular right now, that I think you alluded to, is polypropylene. And that's what I'm very proud of, I guess, as an observer and an advisor to the industry, because polypropylene recycling is an industry driven initiative. There's no law that says you have to, put a deposit program on polypropylene or collect it or recycle it, but the industry is really trying to do it, and with little government support or initiative. And so it's a growing part of the LNO portfolio today.
Martha, in terms of FDLNOs, I know there's a lettering system, a C through F, a C through H, etc. What do these letters mean? Can I use my LNO to kind of use it in any type of food packaging? Walk us through a little bit of the nuances of the LNOs themselves.
Sure, it's a little bit alphabet soup, right?
Yeah.
But it's really important to understand two
Yeah.
tables that FDA has. One is they have a table of food types, and then the second table is conditions of use. And
Mhm.
I liken them to menus, and you can go onto these menus and select the food types and conditions of use that your system is able to recycle, and also that your customers want and that you want to sell. So what do I mean by that? FDA in an LNO setting will review your LNO request for what you ask for. So you do have to think pretty closely about what you're asking FDA to review. They'll never give you more than you ask for, even if you qualify for it. So the ask is really important here, okay? But the food types, going back to that first chart, are basically separated out into aqueous and acidic foods, then dairy, and foods that are fatty foods, we call them, would be the next category, and then low alcohol and high alcohol content foods. So those are the four food types. And then the conditions of use range from, high temperature heat sterilization, so, over 212 degrees F, down to frozen food temperatures. Those temperature conditions refer to the temperature at which the food is packaged and stored. So you have to take those two things into consideration, okay? And the bottom line here with selecting what food types your packaging is appropriate for and under what conditions the recycled plastic will be extruded and processed into, that under the LNO program, if you're going for room temperature and below, so we call that, room temperature is condition of use E, and below is G is frozen storage, H is frozen or refrigerated storage. So E through G with an aqueous food, perhaps an acidic food, and the dry food. I forgot about dry foods, but they're not really as, that they're easier in the hierarchy. So, those kinds of clearances can be obtained with good source control for your process. But, and I'll finish here in a minute, the distinction I'm trying to make is that if you want any conditions or food types that are more rigorous, so fatty foods, which can, packaging materials can migrate into fatty foods easier. Fatty foods or high temperature conditions, normally you'll have to do some kind of challenge testing to show that your system is effective in removing specific types of contaminants from the material that may come out under those conditions, those more rigorous conditions. So there's kind of two buckets. There's the room temperature and below, and then there's the high temperature fatty foods kind of classification. And again, whether you go for this depends on what your market is going to be for the product, how you want to market the product, if your process can achieve the conditions, and if you want to really invest in the challenge testing, which is, we'll talk about that, I'm sure, in a few more minutes. It's called challenge testing for a reason.
Okay. So from the recycler side, the recycler has to be mindful of, I guess, trying to get as many letters as possible, as wide of an application as possible, because that recycler could then sell that material to many different customers who might be packaging it in very cold temperature or very hot temperature, might be packing dry foods, but also acidic foods, fatty foods, etc. But on the user side, the user of that recycled material, it's really trying to understand, what are you packing? What temperature are you packing at? And therefore then getting a sense of, do I need something that is just E through G, or do I need the whole gamut of the alphabet soup?
Yeah, and I'll give you a good example of that. If you're a cosmetic manufacturer, there's no FDA regulations that govern the cosmetic packaging specifically. And so many cosmetic companies look to FDA's rules for food packaging, okay, as a quality control for their own packaging. And so typically for cosmetics, there's an understanding that a recycled material that's approved for E through G conditions and also for aqueous and acidic foods will be suitable for use in cosmetic packaging. Okay. And you're right. People build portfolios. You can start off maybe with, again, without doing the challenge testing, if you have good source control, getting E through G for these aqueous and acidic food types, dry food, of course, and get into berry boxes and egg cartons and trays and maybe also some food service items, utensils and single serve items like that, cups. And then as you build a market, go back and do some challenge testing and go in for something like A through H or B through H to get those higher and more rigorous conditions of use.
Got it. That's very interesting. I didn't realize cosmetics companies would want FDA LNOs, even though it's not necessary, but they want to use it as a quality control mechanism.
Yeah, well, an LNO actually isn't necessary at all. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
It's a voluntary process that FDA established with industry back in the day because, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act does allow you to self-certify your materials. But I think the market, it's particularly for some, certain food types, the beverage industry comes to mind particularly, really demands the LNO letter to qualify materials that they'll use in their packaging. So I think the program serves a really important quality control function there as well.
Very interesting. So let's segue into obtaining an LNO because, of course, I'm very aware of certain machinery manufacturers saying, hey, our machine comes with an LNO. What does that mean? And if somebody uses a machine to recycle that doesn't have an LNO, what do they do to go about getting the LNO?
Right. Yes, there are a couple of equipment companies that have established a really unique marketing strategy that includes a regulatory component. And they have gone into FDA and obtained LNOs for their equipment for certain plastics and recycled plastics, and also under certain food types and conditions of use, as we've discussed. And if a company does install the specific process that FDA reviewed, that LNO attaches, and that is because the LNO attaches and is for a review of the process, and not, and this is something maybe folks don't really appreciate, not the
Mhm,
recycled plastic itself. An
mhm,
LNO is a review of the recycling process. So if you have a same process as somebody else who has an LNO, you can license their LNO. FDA allows that. That's another way
mhm,
to get an LNO. If you buy their, somebody's equipment, that purchase can come with being able to rely on that LNO because FDA has reviewed the process. When you buy somebody's equipment, or if you buy a plant, you certainly want to make sure that if that equipment has an LNO, that intellectual property is, part of the transaction, right? So there are ways that you can have an LNO without actually going through the process, but most people go through the process.
mhm. Okay. And so what does that process look like? So let's say there's
Yeah.
a machinery that doesn't come with an LNO. What is the process of going through and obtaining an LNO?
hmm Um, there's not a form, but there is this guidance document that we want to make sure everybody's aware of. Again, it's on FDA's website. It really spells out the process for what you need to demonstrate in a letter of no objection request, we call them.
Mhm,
So you have to
mhm,
really focus on and explain to FDA what post-consumer recycled plastic you're sourcing, or if it's a different type of material, where you're sourcing it from. That's really critical. And you
mhm,
have to really tell a story about how that material gets to your facility, how it's transported, how it's stored, and then provide a detailed description, including a diagram of your grinding and wash process. And then I should say, time and temperature conditions. That's really important for FDA to understand because they want to understand, including any detergents or that you might use. You need to make sure that those are food grade. Any additives that you add at the end of your process to the material, you also have to provide information on those so FDA understands that they are food grade. The other part that you should include is any explanation about what happened, when the material exits the process, is it flake, or ultimately are you selling pellets? So you want to
mhm,
just you can try to get, the LNOs for flake and pellets. Many people do. But
mhm,
what I wanted to say there, and this is really important, FDA does take extrusion into account in an LNO review because they understand that vacuum extrusion and other types of, we call them super clean technologies,
mhm,
devolatilization comes to mind, that those kinds of processes and steps additionally help to clean up the material, to remove
mhm,
volatiles. So FDA will take the post washing and grinding and drying step into consideration as well. So you want to put all of that, package that up, and you submit it to FDA. FDA does not have a time limit in which they, review these submissions, and they have a small staff. I'd like to do a shout out to Dr. Vani Kamal-Prasit, who just retired at the end of 2023 after many years. She was involved in the inception of the program, and she was so instrumental in developing it and into the successful program it is today. But there's still some great people left at FDA that are reviewing these files. They typically take maybe 3 months, sometimes 6 months if they're backed up. They take them, as they receive them. If you have a really good submission going into the process, it will certainly reduce the time that it takes for FDA to
Hmm.
review. If they have questions, they'll come
Hmm.
back to you and you'll have to respond, and that can make the process a little bit more lengthy. And then at the end, when the questions are all done, and if FDA agrees, that your process qualifies, they'll issue a single page letter, one letter, and that's your letter of no objection. Then after a period of maybe 2 or 3 months, there's a little bit of a lag. The LNO will be assigned a number and go up on the FDA's public website for everybody to see. So that's the process kind of from start to finish. If you include some kind of challenge testing, as part of the process, that adds several months. So particularly in a challenge test kind of situation, you're looking at probably a year, if not more, from start to finish. Whereas if you're looking for a just kind of a source control, E through G approval, that kind of
Hmm.
process, from start to finish, when you contact somebody or you start writing your letter, probably 6 months, just to give
Got it.
people and you a sense of the timing.
Got it. So walk me through this part is the recycler is submitting their own documentation, their own process. Is there an audit that the FDA does apart from challenge testing? How does that process or that portion kind of come together?
Yeah. Well, I alluded to this before, but it's worth restating. Hopefully, I can restate it even more effectively,
Mhm.
which is FDA relies on the representations of the LNO submitter that it is going to process the material in the way it states, meet the standards that it needs to meet, and that the LNO submitter is going to monitor that. Because in addition to the letter of no objection, recycled plastics have to qualify for the same conditions that virgin plastics qualify for. So there's for PET and for the olefins, there is a virgin resin standard that includes, density specifications, some end testing that you need to do to demonstrate again that you're making food safe plastic. There's the Toxic and Plastics Clearinghouse testing for certain heavy metals that you should be conducting. And, FDA prohibits placing any material into the food supply that is adulterated or misbranded. So even after the LNO is received, you still have to make sure that you're not imparting any organoleptic properties that could lead to contamination or adulteration of the food. There's a lot of compliance going on there, but you are responsible for ensuring that. FDA doesn't normally come and audit you after an LNO, and those LNOs are granted on the understanding that you will ensure the conditions that you're representing in your LNO application.
Got it. In what cases would one have to do challenge testing? Can we dig a little bit deeper on that side?
Yeah, I mean, you really do have to do challenge testing if you, going back to our conditions of use and food types here, if you want to try for an LNO that is as broad as it would be for a virgin material. So, condition of use A, high temperature heat sterilized, B is boiling water, C is hot filled above 150 F, D hot filled below 150 F. If you want A through D, you really
Mm.
have to do challenge testing. Those are rigorous high temperature conditions that can cause material to come out, to migrate out of a packaging material. And so FDA wants to know that your system can, clean up those materials. And also on the food type side, if you want to package, I would say food type 5, which is low moisture fats and oils, any fatty food types here, 7, and also to some extent dairy as well, that those food types to use a recycled material in connection with them will need challenge testing.
And is challenge testing as simple as sending off the material to a lab for doing certain types of testing, or does it involve more than that?
Well, there's not many labs that do challenge testing. Might be due to demand, so maybe, as the number of
Mm,
LNOs, maybe or interest in getting those kinds of LNOs
mm,
increases, more labs will do the or offer that testing. I think also part of it is that the challenge test protocol is in FDA's guidance document.
mm,
Okay. And it involves a cocktail of chemicals that's that are highly hazardous, let's be honest. And so they're not all labs that are qualified to handle, that kind of cocktail of chemicals. But what you do is you subject the interestingly enough, virgin resin. You do not use your recycled resin. You
mm,
subject virgin resin because that's your control
mm,
to this cocktail of contaminants for a
mm,
specified period of time, and then you process it through that contaminated material through your system. And
mm,
that's also a challenge to some companies because you only need about 150 pounds or 300 pounds of material, to do
mm,
the challenge testing. But that's a pretty small amount compared to the scale of material that you all process every day. So how do you do
mm,
that? You have to work that out. And then you collect the material after it comes out of your process. You send it back to the lab, and they analyze it for whether um, the levels of each contaminant is below a certain threshold that FDA requires. So for
got it.
olefins, it's 320 ppb. Okay, if you're above, there is another step which you can do migration testing at
Mhm,
that point, and for the specific contaminants that are still above that level that FDA specifies, that's the threshold of migration. It's a level at which FDA considers the contaminants to be safe or have no impact on dietary consumption in the food supply.
mm,
But the migration testing will tell you to the extent to which those contaminants will migrate out of the packaging into food. And so, for example, heavy metals sometimes, and there is a heavy metal here, copper, stays in the packaging, but it also doesn't migrate out very readily either. And the whole concept of the safety of food packaging is, whether or not it becomes a food additive. We didn't talk about
mm,
that, but that's the fundamental underpinning of this entire
mhm,
process. A food additive is a substance that, when used as intended, is reasonably expected to become a component of food. But if it never becomes a component of food, then it's not a food additive. Okay. And so if you can show that, those components are not going to migrate, that's another way to qualify your material with FDA.
mm, got it.
Yeah, it's a really complicated process, and there's a lot of back and forth
Yeah,
in the challenge testing,
yeah.
contaminating the material, analyzing the material,
Mhm,
and again, it's worth. I mean, obviously, it's worth it to conduct this testing. Many
yes.
companies have done it successfully, and it's what you need really in order to qualify your material for some of the bigger brand packaging applications, the really the premium brands.
Martha, the last question before we conclude is self-certification an option around the LNO?
Well, it is legally, and I'm a lawyer, so I'll put that proviso on it. I think that the market prefers to have an LNO or some kind of a letter from FDA as an added
Mm,
level of assurance. But if you self-certification under for recycled plastics is available if you can show that you're working with an expert in the field that's technically qualified to conduct an analysis. One way in which I've used it is in comparing systems. So a company will come to me and they'll say, I have the same system as company X who has an LNO. Can you write me a letter that my material is suitable for use in food packaging? And if you can do a pretty detailed comparison of the process and show it's the same
mm,
equipment, same steps, etc., that is a way to a basis for self-certifying, and also that the incoming material, is also the same or similar, and the source control and the
mm,
sortation is also as rigorous. So it has to be as good or better, but that is a way that you can self-certify for sure.
got it.
Hmm.
Martha, in conclusion, where do you see this LNO process going as recycled material becomes more available, more in terms of targets that different brands want to hit over the next 5 to 10 years? Do you see this changing? And then what kind of trends do you see in recycled plastics just as a whole in food packaging?
hmm Well, right now there's a high level of activity on polypropylene and also a growing level of activity on qualifying PCR that's sourced from outside of the United States, interestingly enough. I was one of the first to, work with companies to do that, but there's a number of them now. So those are the two big trends in LNOs at this time, and I would expect that to continue. The need for recycled plastics is as important, if not more important, than ever today, with the focus on plastic waste. And recycling is part of the solution. It's never claimed to be the entire solution, but it is, I believe, still an important part of the solution. I think that we'll continue to see that program be, very active. And the only other thing I wanted to say, though, maybe this is a good way to close, and I mean this in a very positive way. But remember, it's the food supply, right? So if you have, I get people that are all excited about different types of feedstocks that they want to recycle, and I do believe that plastic can be recycled for many, many different uses, but if you want to recycle it for food packaging, remember it is the food supply and it has to be suitably pure for its intended use. So not all recycled plastics will be, suitable really for use in food packaging, but that's okay. I mean, we have truck beds, we have all kinds of different, applications out there. But if you're overly ambitious in that regard, the LNO process
Mm,
is hard, if not I don't want to say impossible. It may not be successful. So you just have to manage your expectations there. Remember, it's the food supply, right? It's
got
what
it.
you and I package and what we eat and what we want our children to be eating, and we want that packaging to be suitably pure for its intended use.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Martha, I really appreciate the conversation. I think you've added a lot of depth and understanding to the LNO process, the alphabet soup, and just everything around it. I think you've definitely I've seen the list of LNOs and I have seen your name on a lot of them. So absolutely, you're one of the experts in this field. Yeah, we appreciate the conversation.
Well, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. I remember sitting, in my college dorm saying, for recycling to work, it has to be economical. I've been a
Yeah.
believer in it, for a very long time, and I'm really honored to play a role and to have a part in the industry,
Mhm.
together with the few others in this profession that also do this similar work. But thanks. It's been great to
Yeah.
speak with you today.
And you, Martha, where can our audience find you on social media? If they do want to get in touch with you to possibly go ahead and have more details on the LNO, where can they find you?
Sure. For any questions, I'm at mmarrapese at wiley.law. And we also have a blog called The Well. It's not as active as your blog. I love your blog. That's why I'm here. But probably the best way is to email me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that come out of this podcast.
That's lovely. Thanks, Martha. And we look forward to having you on again soon.
All right. Take care. Thank you, everybody, for
Take
listening.
care. Bye.